Friends, our reading for this morning comes from Plain Living, Quaker Path to Simplicity. It's edited by Catherine Whitmere, and I'm reading, this is what the book looks like. And I'm reading this morning from page 75. This is the section entitled Fear. And I'm reading a passage that was written by Parker Palmer in the year 2000. I chose to attend a weekend course at Hurricane Island off the coast of Maine. In the middle of that week, I faced the challenge that I had feared the most. One of our instructors backed me up to the edge of a cliff about 110 feet above solid ground. He tied a very thin rope to my waist, a rope that looked ill-kept to me and seemed to be starting to unravel somewhat. He told me then to start rappelling down the side of the cliff. "Do what?" I said. "Just go," the instructor exclaimed. So I went, and I immediately slammed into a ledge some 4 feet down from the edge of the cliff with a bone-jarring, brain-jarring force. The instructor looked down at me. "I don't think you've quite got it," he said. "Right," I said, and so I tried again, this time my way. And again, I slammed into the next ledge, another 4 feet down. "You still haven't got it," the instructor said helpfully. I was about halfway down when the second instructor called from below. "Parker, I think you'd better stop and see what's just below your feet." I lowered my eyes very slowly so as not to shift my weight, and saw that I was approaching a deep hole in the face of the rock. I froze, paralyzed with fear. The second instructor let me hang there, trembling, in silence for what seemed like a very long time. Finally, she shouted up these helpful words. "Parker, is anything wrong?" To this day, I do not know where my words came from, although I have 12 witnesses to the fact that I did indeed speak them. In a high, squeaky voice, I said, "I don't want to talk about it." "Then," said the second instructor, "I think it's time you learned the outward bound motto. If you can't get out of it, get into it." There was no way out of my dilemma except to get into it. So my feet started to move. And then, finally, I made it safely down. We have all been where Parker Palmer was, hanging over the side of a cliff, whether metaphorically or literally. He writes in his account that in the end, he knew that he had to go through, that he had to be afraid and keep going. Those are words that spoke deeply to me right now, in a time when many of us are feeling perhaps more afraid, more anxious than we might usually feel. I know that I am fearful for the future of our democracy in this country. We are faced with a great deal of uncertainty about what will happen on Election Day and in the days just after. And there is the very real possibility that we may face political unrest in this country. Political unrest, the likes of which I have never seen in my lifetime. I know that I am also feeling anxious about the ongoing rise of COVID-19 in the United States. Americans continue to die every day from COVID, and the number of cases here in North Carolina and throughout our country are rising steadily. It is likely we will see a dramatic rise as the days grow colder and as more children return to public school. Climate change is a massive and looming threat in our world, one that I think many of us perpetually worry about, but one that has been made much more obvious in the recent months with the fires along the West Coast and by the extreme storms that are bearing down on our country right now. Hurricanes and tornadoes, fires and floods, we are all beginning to feel in a very real way the disastrous impact of climate change on our world. All of these big worries are added to all of the regular anxieties of being a human. The fear that our bodies will not work the way that we are used to as we age. The fear that we will not be able to remain financially stable. The fear of needing surgery, or the fear of not feeling useful to our communities or to the world as we grow older. The fear of letting our children down when they are in need. The fear that our children may struggle and we will be unable to help them, or the fear that they will fail to thrive in their lives, that they will not be happy. The fear that we are not giving enough of ourselves to our jobs, or to our partners, or to our children, or to our pets, or to our houseplants. Every person who I talk to seems to have some variation of a fear that they are not giving enough of themselves to the people that they love or to their houseplants. I feel personally thankful that I have not killed a houseplant anytime in recent months, because I don't know if I could handle that failure on top of all of the other ways that our world seems to be crumbling around us. What do we do when we are afraid? What do we do if that fear is not just the usual fears of being human, which those are things are scary enough, but also these bigger issues that are facing our world right now? Perhaps not surprisingly, our scripture is filled with words about how to face fear. Finding courage is an ongoing theme throughout the Gospels. And often the presence of God, the physical presence of God, in the form of angels within the Gospels, that physical presence first speaks words of courage and comfort. Be not afraid. Of course, this could be because angels were completely terrifying, but I also think it speaks to the human condition. We humans, so often in our lives, experience things that are frightening, difficult, painful, and messy. We are often therefore afraid and bewildered and unsure and anxious. And so the Spirit continually speaks to that condition, often speaking first words of steadying comfort. Here in my office at New Garden, I have a bulletin board that's just to my left here. And posted on the bulletin board is a passage from the book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not told you? Be strong and be courageous. Do not be afraid. and do not be discouraged, for God will be with you wherever you go. It is almost the same reassurance that we hear throughout Hebrew scripture, but especially in the book of Isaiah, a book that is about catastrophic events, plagues and wars, famine and destruction. But again and again throughout the book of Isaiah, we hear this same reassurance. Isaiah 41 verse 10 reads like this: "Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand." We Quakers have historically taken seriously, very seriously, this idea that God is with us wherever we go. We believe that the living Christ, that spirit that is alive in our presence, is interwoven with us so intimately that we talk about the divine light as being something we carry within us. We can never be without God. We are never separate from that divine presence. We are never outside of God's love. And whether we are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, or whether we are facing the election on November 3rd, that spirit of the divine walks with us. The stories of early Quakers, of early Friends, are filled with examples, like the example that is set by Parker Palmer, rather humorously, of Quakers taking heart and moving forward with conviction and perhaps courage to face whatever troubles the day has brought. Although the suffering of early Friends was very real, they continually seemed to rally. In prisons or ministering on the streets, they faced down relentless public criticism and very real persecution. I often think of those early Friends, especially in the last several months. I have thought often about those early Quakers, and I have prayed often that some degree of their fortitude might fill our modern Quaker communities and help lead us forward to face the challenges of the 21st century. I have one particular story of one of our Quaker forebears to share with all of you this morning. I have told this story before, and so it may be familiar to some of you. I want to share a story about Lucretia Mott. And I will admit that I have no idea when I first heard this story or from where, and I don't know if it's actually historically accurate or factually true. But it's a good story. Lucretia Mott was at a conference that was discussing women's suffrage. And as the gathering began to disperse, a crowd of angry protesters, mostly men, gathered outside of the building. The few men who had attended the conference began to worry for the safety of the women as they left the gathering. Slowly, the women left through side doors or through the back to avoid the crowd. And the crowd became louder and louder, angrier and more violent. In the end, only a few people remained, including Lucretia Mott. She stood on the steps and looked out at the gathered angry crowd. She was about to leave when one of the men from the conference said to her, "We're worried for your safety. You cannot go through that crowd." Mott looked out at the men who had gathered, and she found the angriest, most dangerous-looking man in the crowd. And she said, "I will be just fine. This man here is going to escort me and protect me." And he did. And Mott walked through the crowd and got to the other side safely. So what does the story of Lucretia Mott and the angry crowd and Parker Palmer hanging on the side of a cliff, what do they have in common? They remind us that we have to go through before we can come out the other side. They remind us that it matters how we walk through. They remind us that we walk through and that we trust and we hope that a time will come when we get to the other side, when our feet again find solid ground. They remind us that as we walk through, we can be supported by our commitment to our values of mercy and justice and love. They remind us that we walk through even when we are not sure of where to put our feet. We walk through and we can offer to hold the hands of those who may trip and fall as they walk with us. We walk through with the Spirit at our shoulder. We walk on through. I have another quote on my bulletin board here. It's pinned up right next to the one from the book of Joshua. It's from The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R. Tolkien. It's an exchange between Frodo and Gandalf. "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." Decide each day, friends, what you will do with this day that you have been given. And may you find comfort in the words of the angels to be not afraid. And if that is not possible, may you remember that God will be with you. Wherever you go, whether you walk through an angry crowd or whether you have to scale down the face of a cliff, or whether you are facing uncertain times in the United States, whether you are facing surgery, injury, or grief, remember that the Spirit walks at your shoulder this day and every day to come. And may you remember the courage of our Quaker forebears. And may you walk on through.